You've heard Huawei got banned for spying. You've also heard it was just America crushing a rival it couldn't beat. Here's the annoying part: both of those are wrong, and the real reason is stranger than either. Let's do the timeline everyone half remembers. December 2018, Huawei's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, gets arrested at the Vancouver airport. May 2019, the US drops Huawei onto the entity list, cutting it off from American technology. Then the bans stack up. Washington, London, allies in a line. It looks like a spy movie. It mostly wasn't. First, let's untangle something, because the Huawei ban is really three different things and people mash them together constantly. 1. A rule about what the government itself is allowed to buy. 2. A supply cutoff, which is the one that actually hurt. It restricted what American technology Huawei could receive. 3. A rule about which gear carriers can buy using federal subsidy money. Different laws, different agencies, different years. That matters, because when someone says, the ban, ask which one. The answer changes who was affected and how much. Most of the shouting online is people arguing about three separate policies as if they were one. Narrative 1. It's all proven spying. Backdoors in every box. Here's what the record actually shows. On that famous arrest, not a spying charge at all. Bank fraud, for allegedly misleading a bank about Huawei's business in Iran, and the big 2012 congressional report everyone cites. After a year of digging, investigators couldn't point to a single backdoor Huawei had planted in US gear. Now, be fair to that report. It still told American companies to steer clear, because it couldn't get straight answers about the company's ties to the Chinese state. Its problem was what it couldn't rule out, not what it found. To this day, no government has published a smoking gun backdoor. Claims of classified proof, sure, but nothing ever put on the table. Sit with that. Now, narrative 2. The reply guy favorite. See, it's baseless, pure protectionism. America just torching a competitor. That's lazy too, because the fear was never fantasy. China's 2017 intelligence law says in plain text, that organizations and citizens shall support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence work. Lawyers argue hard about the next 4 words, in accordance with law, and about how much that actually constrains anybody. Fine. But you don't need a backdoor found today when the law can be read to compel one tomorrow. That's not a phone feature. That's a legal question, and it doesn't go away because the last audit came back clean. Now, let me argue the other side properly, because the strongest case for banning Huawei never needed a backdoor at all. And Britain did something nobody else did. It let Huawei in, then built a whole laboratory to tear the code apart, staffed with its own security service. And that lab's own public reports were brutal. Year after year, they described serious systemic problems in Huawei's software engineering. Sloppy code, old components, build processes so inconsistent the lab couldn't always reproduce the software actually running in the network. Read that again. You don't need a hidden trapdoor if the front door doesn't close properly. That is the honest case. It came from people who looked hardest, and anyone waving it away hasn't read it. So, here's the quiet part. Both sides skip. Absence of a public smoking gun is not the same as innocence, and they never proved it, is not the same as there was nothing to prove. The real issue was never one hidden chip. It was concentration. One company, legally tied to one government, was on track to wire a huge share of the planet's networks. You don't have to prove a single crime to be nervous about handing your entire nervous system to a company your rival can lawfully lean on. That's the whole ball game, and nobody sells it as a headline because it doesn't fit on a jersey. Here's what the pros knew and the coverage missed. This was never really about phones. A phone is a leaf. The prize was the radios, the base stations, and the network core, the boxes bolted to towers that actually wrote a country's traffic. Huawei was the biggest maker of that gear on Earth, undercutting its European rivals on price. Ban the phone, you annoy a consumer. Ban the radios, and you're defending the network itself. And it goes deeper than hardware. Whoever writes the 5G standard owns a slice of every 5G device forever. Through standard essential patents, the rules you literally cannot build a network without. Huawei quietly amassed one of the largest piles of them on Earth. That's not just selling gear. That's writing the rulebook and collecting rent on it. Letting a rival author the world's most important network scared people far more than any backdoor ever did. But here's what made the ban land, and almost nobody covers it. America didn't have to seize Huawei's factories. It only had to control one choke point. Advanced chips are made on machines built by a very small number of companies, and the software and tooling behind them run through American technology. Put Huawei on the entity list, and suddenly it isn't cut off from a supplier. It's cut off from the ability to make the thing at all. That's the difference between a tariff and a tourniquet. The whole fight only works because modern electronics has a few places where the world narrows to a single road. And watch what Britain did next, because it's the tell. This is the country that built the lab, read the code, and decided it could manage the risk. It said yes, with limits. Then, months later, it reversed itself completely and ordered Huawei out of its 5G network entirely. What changed wasn't new evidence of spying. What changed was the chip choke point. Once Huawei was cut off from the good silicon, Britain's own experts said they could no longer vouch for what would be inside future equipment. The security case didn't win the argument. The supply chain did. Which brings us to the bill. U.S. law barred the government from buying the stuff back in 2018. Regulators built a covered list, and rural carriers were told to rip Huawei out of their towers and replace it. Sounds simple. The program ran billions of dollars past what was first set aside because pulling trusted infrastructure back out is brutally expensive. Trust is cheap to give and murder to claw back. So what did all this mean for you, the person just trying to buy a phone? If you owned a Huawei, that cutoff is why the next one shipped without Google's apps. No Play Store, no maps. If you live somewhere rural, the cheap gear in your local tower had to come out, and somebody had to pay to swap it. Your carrier options and the box down your road got quietly rearranged by a fight you never saw and never voted on. And here's the bill nobody put in the press release. Take the biggest supplier out of the market, and you don't get a healthy market. You get a very short list. For the gear that runs a modern mobile network, the realistic choices collapse to a handful of companies worldwide. Fewer suppliers means less price pressure, slower upgrades, and a carrier with almost nowhere to walk if one of them disappoints. Security and competition pulled in opposite directions here, and security won. That's a defensible call, it just wasn't a free one. The industry's answer was to break the box open. Instead of buying one vendor's entire tower, the idea was to standardize the seams so you could mix parts from different suppliers. Competition rebuilt by design instead of by luck. It's a genuinely good idea. It's also been slower and harder than the slide decks promised, because the boring part, making everyone's equipment actually agree with everyone else's, is the whole job. The lesson generalizes a monopoly is easy to ban and hard to replace. And the twist ending, the ban didn't kill Huawei. Years in, it shipped a phone with an advanced homegrown chip that most analysts didn't think China could make yet. Sanctions and all. Cornered, it went and built its own supply chain. Which tells you the real story here isn't bad company caught. It's two superpowers deciding they will not run on each other's wires. And here's the part that should make you laugh, or wince. Banning a company's equipment does not cancel its patents. Huawei holds a serious stack of the rules baked into 5G, and it licenses them to phone makers and to a long line of European car makers in countries that were busy banning its gear. Now, before you picture a money fountain, the licensing income is small change against a company that size. And Huawei actually pays out more in patent royalties to other people than it collects. That's the honest version, and it's more interesting than the myth. The point was never the money. It's that you can rip the boxes out of a tower, and you still cannot rip the ideas out of the standard. History already ran this experiment. In 1902, Britain finished the All Red Line. A telegraph web wrote it to touch only British soil. Because empires don't run their nerves through a rival's wires, and once a power decides that, it basically never buys back in. So, here's my one call, and blame the cat, not anyone with a real job. No administration lifts the Huawei ban before 2030. Not this party, not the other one. It stopped being politics and became plumbing. And notice what the pattern actually predicts, not one company's market share, which nobody can measure the same way twice. It predicts a shape. The All Red Line didn't make Britain bigger. It turned one map into two. Screenshot that. If the question, who owns the wires, is your kind of trouble, the long version of that fight, who owns the airwaves over your actual house, is on the channel. Link below. Same frequency, same cat.
That's it for this one. If that was useful, subscribe. We do a lot more of these. See you soon.